Hello, my name's Lesley Atherton and this is my short story called Music in the Basement. It sounded like violin music, and it was coming from the basement. I was sure it was the sound of violin music that I could hear, and was almost as certain that the melodies emanated from below where I currently stood, next to the sink in the kitchen of my Vermont home. But there were two questions I had to ask. First, why was the music coming from the basement? And second, how did I get into the damned basement anyway? As you've probably gathered from the last sentence, I didn't know this house all that well. It was a classic New England timber-built beauty, and without the dubious benefit of a real estate agent to show me around, I'd been left to discover pretty much everything for myself. The garage, crammed with plastic crates of car parts and bottled water, had been quite an eye-opener, I can tell you. But I'm guessing that's fairly commonplace when you inherit a property and its contents from an unknown relative. That's what happens when you take up the challenge to relocate from a tiny Cumbrian cottage to another house, another country, another continent. The sound was definitely violin. The notes were strung together into a concerto now, one I recognised, one I could hum and one I could harmonise. I knew the beginning and middle and end. I knew the exposition and development, but could not give the piece a name. Was this a sad indictment of a wasted life, or just proof of my appalling memory? It didn't matter, but the music in my basement definitely did. If the sounds had been wasps or rats or bears, dear God, surely there aren't bears in Vermont, I'd have felt no ambivalence. But as it was, I wasn't sure if the human element to the sound made its discovery more or less worrying. I sat at the table considering the problem. There was only one door left unopened, the one door that remained firmly shut. Please don't put this down to laziness. I'd only been in the house for 2 days and was still surrounded by boxes. I hadn't even had time to try it once I'd given it a first attempt. If something didn't open, then it had to wait till I was a little more, what my mum liked to call, sorted. But without knowing how I'd propelled myself there, I found myself standing at the edge of the kitchen's checkered floor and reaching out to check that locked door again. Of course, it was still locked. I walked back into the hall and removed the huge ring of keys from the bureau's top drawer. It was worth trying them, surely. It never struck me that I should have been apprehensive or frightened. I didn't think of the B-movie, barely dressed girl who always paces, torch in hand, to the spookiest part of a building in ebony blackness to investigate something that more than likely should have been left uninvestigated. I also didn't think of how she usually comes to a bad end. I didn't think of those girls till later, when it was far too late. The violin sounds continued, and an inquiring mind can never allow a mystery to pass by, so I rummaged around in the bureau again, for stationery this time. I pulled out a small plastic bag. That would do. Bag in one hand, jailer's metal ring in the other, I returned to the door and tried each key in turn. Methodically, I placed a blue circular sticker onto each key I tried and failed. Soon, only 4 were remaining, then 3, then 2, and I was running out of stickers. At the final key, a rusting heavy slab of metal, colder than the others against my fingertips, I knew I'd got it right. The key turned and it cracked the mechanism inside the door as the lock sprung open. Taking a deep breath, I pulled back the 2 bar locks and pushed the door, which opened directly over a set of handrail-free wooden stairs. I felt around for the light and realised the violin's screeches came louder, and now I could hear the soft tones mixed with the high. The subtlety of the sound waves sounded almost like the screams of an anxious child. I felt around for the light. Thank goodness Aunt Harriet had maintained her home reasonably well. The bulb worked, and years of dust were illuminated, rising from my footfalls as my body descended, and the sound rose higher and stronger, becoming louder and more compelling. 2 more steps and my wobbling descent would be over. I don't know what I was expecting. Perhaps I'd been hoping to come face to face with the real Sherlock Holmes, a vampiric century-old detective squatter who'd been embarrassingly caught practising in the middle of a 3-pipe problem. Or perhaps I'd expected to discover an air vent orally connecting this basement to the family den of my neighbour's home, wherein a talented teenager practised for her first major recital. I hadn't known what I was expecting, but it's fair to say that I definitely wasn't expecting anything like this. Ahead of me, in my dead and never-met auntie's minimally furnished basement, was a white oak rocking chair. It was facing the steps and moving back and forth in time with the violin, as if propelled by invisible conductor, a shadow dancer, an unseen set of flexing thigh muscles. Surely someone perched on it, right on the edge of it, was leaning forward, winding wool or extinguishing their cigarette in an unseen ashtray. And oh, I knew, don't you also know, how an empty rocking chair openly invites spirits of darkness and evil to partake of pleasure and frivolity at the householder's expense. I should have squashed the unseen squatters and pushed them from the chair, grappled them to the stone floor and bade them to be gone. Yes, I couldn't move to the chair, prevent its motions, or calm the trundlings of wood on stone as I waited for the concerto to complete. Instead, I found myself frozen, yet singing along and practically eating the sounds I heard, so keen was I to keep them near. Vermont surely was affecting my mental state. I vowed to check online if the water was rich with fluoride, heavy metals, or hallucinogenic drugs. I sang without fear, harmonising with the lead violin in a song without words. As I did so, I looked around the room that was so totally unlike the rest of the cluttered old house. The rocker took pride of place, of course, and next to it was placed a small table upon which rested a candlestick. The candle was lit, and its wax cylinder almost burnt to the holder, wax seeping without direction onto an innocuously placed bone china mug, saucer and plate. I laid my keyring onto the table as I took another look. Both mug and plate had been used. The mug showed coral red lipstick stains, and the plate still held crumb traces of not too recent refreshment. Both mug and plate were decorated with buttercups and orange lilies, rushes and ferns. The rest of the basement was empty, apart from a crowbar resting under the intentionally blackened window, and a mirror on the wall in front of the chair. The stone floors continued infinitely outwards into the shadows. I looked towards the rocking chair as music and motion stopped, my feelings on both matters fluctuating between disappointment and relief. Perhaps I'd been dreaming or hallucinating. After all, it was only 6 a.m, and I was only awake and continuing to progress my house move because the combination of new house, new life and new sounds had ensured I'd slept badly. Something was unpleasant about the calm, and I reached in front of me to feel the rocking chair that had rocked itself suddenly and without wavering into stasis. The music cessation had been immediate too. It hadn't played itself out, a record reaching its final groove and returning the stylus to its home. I moved in closer to the chair, still singing the final musical phrase I'd heard, but with determination rather than lyricism now. And then I stopped. Another superstition, or was it a curse, came to mind. If you sing before 7, you'll cry before 11. Or was that die before 11? Dizzy then, I grabbed the rocker and fell into it, reclaiming the space from so-called evil spirits and looking directly ahead of me with eyes blurred by confusion and candlelight. I looked into the mirror and caught my reflection by candlelight. The music, what was that music? An eerily self-propelling rocking chair, my singing too early in the day, the viewing of my own reflection by candlelight, all were portents, all were bad. It was then that the music began again, trickling into my consciousness with the soothing elegance of an infant's lullaby. No, I don't know what made the rocker move again, this time under me. Perhaps it had been the motion of my own body, but I don't think so. I think it moved with purpose, to comfort, to carry, to soothe, to lead onward to eternal slumber. The rocking motion, the early hour. Surely a few minutes' rest wouldn't hurt me. I yawned, and as I did, I felt my soul slip, struggling through my uncovered mouth, ectoplasm vomiting out of my body and circling the basement. Numbly, I arose from the rocker and prized open the window with the crowbar. It had been used before, I knew that now. The window opened easily, as if it had wanted to be freed from its frame, and my soul drifted out, liberated and free at last. Had it sought oblivion, or had liberation been forced? It didn't matter. That was the end of my little self. That's what I thought as my soul and living strength drifted away. I was soon to be gone, without anyone to miss me. Unseen fingers lifted the keys up to the top of those wooden basement steps, secured the door, and deposited the heavy metal keyring into the bureau, exactly as I'd found it. and as the rocker continued its perpetual motion, my final earthbound thoughts were of my own beneficiary and their beneficiary, and how all might spend their eternities with me on this white oak rocker. They too would drift away into nothingness, accompanied only by Elgar's violin concerto in B minor, opus 61. That was it, Elgar. Death and only death truly does hold all the answers. I called my aunt to me, and we began to dance.